Hi everyone, welcome to NLC's webinar with Polco. My name is Carlin and I'm one of the staffers at the National League of Cities and work with our enterprise partners who are committed to bringing savings and solutions to member cities of our organization. At NLC, we're committed to bringing innovative solutions to all of your cities, towns, and villages in the United States. And now when Polco approached us almost a year ago, it was a no-brainer that their civic engagement platform would not only be effective and affordable, it would serve the needs of our local leaders and their constituencies. In just 2 or 3 years now, Polco is doing work across 22 states and have engaged residents over 120,000 times on more than 250 topics. If those data points aren't compelling enough, then I'm going to turn it over to Nick Mastronardi, CEO of Polco, to speak with you all, and Mayor Timothy Hanna of Appleton, Wisconsin, and Michelle Kobayashi from the National Research Council to show you how Polco can thrive within your community and how you can use Polco to further engage your residents. If any of you have questions, please use the question and chat box on your screens and we'll be sure to communicate those at the end of the webinar. But with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
Thanks, Carlin. Welcome, everyone. Really excited. I think we have some great content lined up for you today. In particular, it's on data from municipal governments. I'm going to focus on civic engagement data from municipal governance. This is a great topic given today's day and age. And without further ado, just jump into a short overview of the agenda for this webinar. We'll do quick introductions, followed by a quick fire, thoughts about how technology and data are changing how cities govern. We will talk a little bit about the importance of resident input data, how technology can help facilitate resident input data. And then we'll listen to a successful showcase, a case study with Mayor Hanna in Appleton on engagement, his budgeting process, and listen to his outline of a vision of how those two, he sees them coming together. We'll recap with a few takeaways and would love to capture some of your guys' Q&A. Again, if you have key questions that pop up, please drop them in the chat window and then we'll answer them real time if they're fundamental. Otherwise, we'll circle back at the end, but looking forward to the conversation with you all here today. Introductions. Michelle is Vice President with the National Research Center and over the last 20 years has helped facilitate great engagement, input, and analysis to really help cities go forward. A wealth of experience and her talks are extremely informative. My background, I spent a little time working in the White House on municipal financing policies, a little time leading some data science for Amazon, was a professor in a former life, and in the Air Force. Did my graduate work in Austin, Texas. Mayor Hanna has been the mayor of Appleton, Wisconsin since 1996. Is constantly regarded as doing a lot of innovative things. Just a brief background on Appleton. I was reading a book, a biography of Thomas Edison last week, and Appleton tried to give New York City a run for the money to be one of the first electrically lit cities in the country, and have always been pushing the frontier ever since. Mayor Hanna is very well regarded in the city, constantly and very high quality of life ratings. So we're looking forward to hearing from him on a couple of those topics. So with that, just synthesizing those down, here's a couple of the synthesized topics for today, and I'm going to hand it over to Michelle.
Great, thank you, Nick. I'm really excited to be here today. Like Nick said, I work for National Research Center, and we are a research and evaluation firm working in government, and particularly in local government. We've spent the last 25 years doing surveys, focus groups, all kinds of data collection activities for local government. So we're really passionate about getting folks involved in public discourse and really the methods that help local governments to do it well. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the problems and why it's important, and also some of the practices we see that look to be promising. Yes. So, but I want to start though from hearing a little bit from you all. We want you to tell us how would you describe your jurisdiction skills in public engagement? And there should be a poll coming on the screen. Do you feel like you do an excellent job, a good job, a fair job, or a poor job? So please take time to vote. We just want to know a little bit about how you feel about your relationship with these activities these days. And Carlin, is our votes coming in?
Yes, they are. Sorry, I had myself on mute, but yes, we do have quite a few votes coming in.
And I believe we'll be able to show this graph. If not, Carlin will tell us the data. Let's see. There we go. And so what we find is you've got about 41% of you saying good, 45% saying fair, and 14% saying poor. This is actually probably better than what I hear when I go around the nation and ask folks. We often see a few more people in the fair and poor categories. And it's not to say that people don't have the skills. I think it's more so that it's really hard to do well. And I feel like folks are really struggling. And I know with the advent of social media and technology, folks have a lot of hope that we can engage a wider variety of folks in a lower burden way. But a lot of folks have not been able to get ahead of the technology or figure out how to use it right so that it actually can make public engagement easier. I hear a lot of complaining and whining from staff and city officials these days about how much time and how hard it's been to try to gather all this information and react and move forward with a lot of the onset of information coming at them. And then we can move back to the slideshow. Great, thank you. So public engagement, I want to start a little bit by telling a story. I started working in local government about 30 years ago, and I worked for the city of Boulder for 7 or 8 years in the 90s at a time when they were doing a lot of innovative work in growth management and promoting alternate transportation use. And at that time, we also happened to have a resident in town. His name was Evan, and city staff and officials affectionately, or not so affectionately, called him Evan from heaven. Evan actually had a unique job where he was actually a tightrope walker. So at night, he would be on our pedestrian wall on a tightrope walking, and he worked for tips. And so he often just worked on weekend nights or some summer days, and then he had a lot of free time. Also, Evan was super articulate, super smart, and was super into bikes. So at first, we were really excited about having Evan in the community because we thought we're trying to work on bike-friendly communities. Maybe he'd help us a lot with bike paths, and all those types of things. But what we came to find out is that Evan liked bikes maybe too much. In fact, it made him hate almost every other transportation mode. So Evan was anti-car, anti-transit, and also even almost anti-pedestrian. So anyways, Evan, because he had a lot of time and was super smart and super articulate, he caused staff a lot of work because he felt like bikes should be involved in any policy decision or decision made in the city. So he attended all meetings, came and visited staff at their offices every day. And so one night after a very long council meeting, and staff are sitting there, we're actually kind of licking our wounds. Some planner had said, I just calculated that Evan probably cost the city of Boulder about $100,000 in staff time every year. Him coming to our offices, making us answer questions, making us do new studies, derailing a lot of our meetings. He actually is really costly to this local government. And then another staff member jokingly said, that doesn't even factor in the count of therapy that all the staff need for the fact that he stresses us out so bad all the time and derails all our planning. So Evan is an example of a person that I think exists in many communities across America. Almost every community has that Evan or a group of Evans that really are single issue focused or maybe just government watchdogs that are really constantly engaged with government, but they're not always representative and not always interested in the good of everyone, even though they think they might be. But they're generally often not representative, and I'll show you more a little bit about that in my data later. But when we think of public engagement, a lot of city staff, actually, sorry, we'll go back a little bit. Sorry, one more. Just a couple more things. The other big challenges we think in public engagement and doing it right is the one thing I've noticed that is if you don't do it right, it may cost money to do it well, and it does, but also it may cost more if you don't do it right. I think in every community, anyone who's been in local government for a while, they have realized or they have an experience where they were at a town hall meeting or a council member or a staff member said something that was misinterpreted or taken out of context, and there's been a big combustion afterwards, and it's taken months, years to heal. I work in communities sometimes where 12 years ago, a bad town meeting has still caused a break in a relationship that's important and is very hard to heal. So we know it can be really, really troublesome if done poorly. And also it often involves hostile residents. People who go to Amazon and Yelp, you'll see much more than not, they're complaining, they're negative. And it's because fear and anger draw us to meetings more often. People who are happy with local government don't go attend their public meetings that often. It's always those angry and irritable people who show up. And so the staff we hire in local government often are trained at being a transportation engineer. They're good at, running a snowplow. They're not trained or maybe even want to talk to hostile residents. So these are all just challenges to the whole public engagement process. But what we know, that these challenges actually can be mitigated. And more importantly, if we do it right, there's so many positive things that come out of it. We know that resident opinion is the bottom line in local government. So we know we don't have, we're not private sector companies, so we don't look at whether our profit increased. But what we do know is, do our residents re-elect our elected officials? Do our residents vote for our sales tax initiatives when we put them out there? Do they support our policies? Their opinion is meaningful. Also, with good public engagement, you get public trust, and transparency, accountability are huge these days. And the best thing, if you do public engagement well, you're going to build that trust. Doing good public engagement can allow you access to resources. You end up meeting members of the community. Maybe it's part of the business community that might offer to help build this park or recruit some kind of healthcare facility you need. It may be that a resident decides to be your champion or help you with public engagement. But by partnering with folks in public engagement in the right way, you can get additional resources. And then finally, our goal is really to get at better decision-making in local government. Now you can flip the slide.
Sorry about that.
And for us, that means measuring data or collecting information about resident opinion in a representative, systematic way. And if you end up with some data, some true data that's accurate and reflective, we think that really lends itself to data-influenced decision-making. Again, a huge trend in local government right now is data-based decision-making, evidence-based policy-making. We talk about data-influenced because we know folks on councils and governing have a lot of good information themselves. But what I love about systematically collecting data about resident opinion or stakeholder opinion is that it gives us all a good starting place. I have personally sat at far too many council meetings where we spent the first half of the day fighting about what's important to residents or what parts of the community are strengths and which ones are challenges and what we should work on. When we actually gather resident opinion systematically in a great way, we have a good starting point, and it makes all our decision-making much more efficient. It also makes it more accountable and more defensible to those folks like Evan who might come and challenge you, telling you that no one wants to have a parking lot for cars, when in fact, most people do. Okay, moving ahead. So one of the key concepts, I think, in terms of deciding about how to do public engagement well is really figuring out who the public are. A number of decades ago, government started to kind of fall into this trend of saying the residents are our clients, they're our customers. And I get that because we're paid to serve them. At the same time, I think it kind of puts us in a mode where when we do public engagement, it's more like customer service. And the main mantra of customer service is the customer is always right. And what we know, those of us who work in local government, the customer is not always right for the greater community. So for me, one of the big concepts in public engagement is really defining your relationship with your residents. And that's why I prefer the word partners. I think the more we see them as partners and collaborators in decision-making rather than our customers, I think that moves us forward and puts us in a different situation in terms of how we meet their demands. Moving ahead. Another way to structure public engagement, I think that's important for us to think about too, is the different types of engagement. I mean, traditionally in the past, local government would often decide, do a lot of work, a lot of great work, decide a policy to pursue, do some policy analysis, the council decides, and then we go out to the public, either right before they vote or soon after, and educate them on all the great work we did, and then let them know that's what's happening. That's one-way engagement. We're telling them what we did. Two-way engagement is what we often do more commonly, which is we then give them a chance to tell us something about it. So right before the council votes or right after the council votes, the residents get up and give comment. However, often by this time, the council's often decided, the staff is usually really far down the path, and they really know the best choice, but the residents don't feel like they've really been involved. And so what's really important, and when we think about public engagement, is really being more deliberative and strategic, making sure you get those residents' opinions in, not at the very end when it's already a done deal, but up front and in multiple times throughout the process so that they're involved and engaged, so you don't get to that public comment session and you have all the angry people up there talking about how you don't listen to them and how it's not a good idea for the community. So there's a lot of ways people use to harness resident opinion. Traditionally, we used to have the resident comment backs at City Hall and all the planning lines and stuff. And now we have that online. We have web pages and Nextdoor and folks where people can just comment about how they think things are going. We still have the town halls, meetings where groups, council meetings, where folks come and give you their input, or we have electronic ones too, where people can get online and talk with staff about the things that are happening. We think these are great ways to engage. But again, when you're using opinions for decision making, you want to make sure you're hearing from a representative sample, and you want that data collected in a way that's more accurate. So at National Research Center, we tend to prefer methods where we are a little bit more involved in deciding who's there and what kind of questions get asked. So we do focus groups. We love surveys because they don't take a lot of time, so they're low respondent burden, and you get a breadth of opinion. And we also love this new trend towards panels where you get residents to, participate and give their opinions on a periodic basis, where they're being involved in local government, but they're not the same type of people who want to spend 3 hours with you every Tuesday night. Here's some data we have from, we do a national citizen survey where we measure residents' opinions of government, also their behaviors in their local government. And we ask people, have you attended council or town meeting in the last 12 months? We also ask them if they watched council or any of the public meetings on TV. And what we find is a very small percentage of the community actually go to meetings. And those of you who've sat on councils or been government staff that go to the meetings, you realize it's the same people over and over. Those the usual suspects, we call them, or the Evans and the other folks in your community that are always going to show up. But what we find from our data is 3/4, 2/3 of folks never come to the meetings. They never talk to you. So you never hear from them. And whether Evan is representative of that community or your other usual suspects is hard to know. So we really try to embrace methods where we get a larger group of residents in the decision-making process, because if not, you can be misled to believe those folks do represent the whole. They are the people who care, and they do care, but they may not represent the average person in your community. And so we have a number of methods we use that we recommend folks do to kind of improve their public engagement processes. And so I just want to end my time with you to talk about those. Number one, and I've talked about it already, kind of hit home on it, it really is important to engage a wide variety of residents. Any kind of public engagement outreach you attend to, you need to make sure it's not the same folks that you're always talking to. Any mode where you start to reach other folks, especially ways where they're just not the people who always end up at council meetings. Hello?
Yep. Gotcha.
Okay, sorry that my screen just all of a sudden freaked out. Okay. We also, sorry, my screen left, but I will go from my notes. So we worry about the other things we look at is we really look at decreasing respondent burden. Like I said, not everybody has 3 hours on a Tuesday night to come hang out with you. So what we find is that's really important is that we decrease respondent burden. We find ways where people can talk to us in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Can we meet them at their home? They don't need to show up. Can it be on their computer, their cell phone? Or can it be something like a survey where they take 10 minutes? We think it's really important that we actually keep it a low response to make sure we get a more representative sample. We think it's really important that when you have important topics in the community, you're very deliberate, very strategic, and have a real plan and how and when you're going to engage residents, and make sure you engage with them multiple times during the process. We think it's really important that you educate staff and public officials on the type of information I'm telling you here. The folks you hear about from all the time who are calling you, shaking your hands, coming and talking to you, that's anecdotal information. In the scientific community, we don't consider that the type of data you should make a lot of your decisions on. You need to be more scientific, more systematic. We think it's important that you assign staff members to be in charge of public engagement and to respond to folks. I think, that's just important nowadays that people actually don't expect employees to do it on their free time or counsel all on their free time to go and react to the public. It has to be part of people's jobs or responsibilities. We also find that even though I was saying that like town halls and some of these more outreachy education activities, they may be more anecdotal, but what we found is they can be really much more productive if you start with some data to begin with. Like when we would, at the City of Boulder, when we wanted to move forward, we would actually first survey residents about their opinions on it, and we present that data as part of our solutions so that even if we are talking to the same usual suspects every time, we now have data as ammunition or to help support what we did. And then finally, like I said, we love the idea of panels. The private sector has moved to panels, getting folks who are periodically kind of give you their opinion. Still, again, keep it low burden so people don't talk to you very often. I mean, they talk to you often, but don't take a lot of time. We find that's a great way to get representation in. So all of these things are the things we've learned over the years, and we try to use in our methods to try to make public engagement better. And now I'll turn it over to Nick and Mayor Hanna, where they're going to kind of tell you more about the technology involved and also how it's being done in Appleton as good examples of how it can really be done well.
Great, thanks so much, Michelle. Yeah, so happy to share a little bit about how we think technology can facilitate this process of gathering quantity and quality of resident input. I think the status quo today is that realistically, there's a number of fractured and disconnected communication channels. Some are outdated, not designed for the civic environment. Some are on some, but rarely are you capturing all when you try to reach out to that. Doing that fractured messaging can leave the residents confused and not participating. That confusion and lack of participation can often result in city officials getting unreliable sentiment data. And in the absence of reliable sentiment data, those squeaky wheels continue to hold disproportionate say on the outcomes. And staff has spent a lot of time managing these channels and these conversations. So even though we've undergone this great technological innovation, we're unfortunately in this poor status quo, and we think we can do better than that. It doesn't have to be this way. And our thought is let's bust some of these myths that might be holding people back into this unfortunate status quo. So outline a few myths and why we think they're really myths and we can all be doing better. So myth number one is if we lower the barriers to participation, it means that we'll only get more extreme voices and maybe more Evans. We'll just, last thing that we want is more of those. And this is what it's going to end up looking like. We don't think that's necessarily the case, and this is why. When the barriers to participation are high, you're just getting the extremes over where those orange dotted lines are. We think as we lower those, and we've seen as we lower those barriers to communication, we start to balance those extreme voices with the ones that are shaded green. The more kind of reasonable, moderate voices help balance out those previously only extreme voices we had been hearing from disproportionately. So myth two is, oh man, if I use another communication channel, it just means more staff time. Some of your staff probably feel as this lady looks. So the myth we want to bust on this one is that, yes, there are a lot of communication channels. None of them really have been built for the civic environment, and that's why things have been complex. And there are some communication channels that can actually unify the previous channels. We think using a city has a lot of communication channels at your disposal, from social media, email, your web page, local media partners, newsletters. Use multiple of those for outreach, but if you have a unifying channel that you can refer folks to a single place to collect verified and organized input, then you're still reaching a lot of people, but your staff isn't having to spend a lot of time manually tabulating and coordinating the input. So what used to look like the orange dotted line, as you increase your number of communication channel, staff time increases. If you're smart about it with a coordinating, unifying communication channel or platform, you can actually keep staff time where it was or even decrease and reach more people. Myth three is quality engagement must only be in the analog to be referenceable. Which a lot less people are opening their doors to folks like this or answering their phones, and response rates are struggling in those channels traditionally. But it need not be that way. Digital engagement can be verified, can work with local voter files to ensure you can still hear from everybody, but to filter results to those that you're hearing one person, each person no more than once, and filter it just to those who are verified to be residents within your city boundaries. So those sort of technologies are now possible, and we're not relegated to that myth from previous. Myth four is using technology makes things risky. Trolls, bullies dominating the results. Need not be the case again. We can put a little bit of structure in the conversations to make sure things are civil and constructive and aren't noisy, and we get the signal rather than the noise. Those sorts of programs exist. So those are myths that I think technology has now allowed us the ability to overcome. And so at the end of the day, we can overcome those myths, and we can nurture a quality engagement experience where for city officials, that is easy, it's rewarding, it gives them data-driven confidence to stand up to the squeaky wheels and say, thanks, we know how you feel, but we also have input from hundreds or thousands of people across the community. And it was easy for us to get that. And I think it also helps the residents because now it's easy for them to provide input. They don't have to drive, find a parking space, and be present for 3 hours for the topic that they want to hear about. It can be rewarding for them to learn and to feel informed and heard. So that's just our vision of what's possible today. With that said, I'm excited to to hand it over to Mayor Hanna. Just a little background on how we've worked together with Appleton, Wisconsin. 2018, we started working together to pioneer some innovative civic engagement technology for their city and their residents. Right before I hand it over, I'll just give a brief description of Polco's platform that we put into Mayor Hanna's hands to kind of overcome these myths and these constraints, and then hand it over to him to share some outcomes with Appleton. Just the way that the platform looks in their use cases, it looks like a SurveyMonkey or a Google form. It's easy to pose questions and background materials to help inform respondents. There's a variety of question types. So as you may expect from a normal type of engagement platform. But after this, things get a little bit different. After you've posted a question in the background materials, they can be shared through a variety of outreach and engagement channels to your community to really meet them where they are. Web pages, social media, email, through local media partners. The city has a lot of communication channels at their disposal through their mobile phones. So you get the word out, and then regardless of where residents find it and respond, everything comes back into a database where we help cross-reference with the local voter file, verify respondents, and organize the results so that city officials can see sentiment of all respondents, as well as the registered subset and breakdowns by precinct, age, gender, and put the maps. And then also we put them into, residents can provide one comment, and everything's organized that way. So there's no kind of hostile threads like might devolve on a Facebook. So that's the nature of the platform that we've put in the hands of Mayor Hanna. I think he'll speak a little more about this, but we share a shared vision kind of on the future. We think it's great with the ease and technology that exists to begin to engage residents in a community faster, easier, and more frequently. And a lot of times folks have just engaged residents at one stage of a policy process, maybe early to, how do you feel on things, or later. But I think now with technology, it's possible and rewarding both for the city and the resident if we can start to engage residents throughout the policy life cycle. But I'll pause there on that. I think it's a great vision for the future. I will, essentially what we're trying to aim to do here is combine the best of several different technologies and elements that before. And if we do those things right, then that vision is possible. And it can result in more participation from the community, more informed, better balanced, good government, give the cities the confidence for data-driven performance management, and save staff. And it's exciting to get to work towards these objectives. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Mayor Hanna. Thanks so much, Mayor Hanna.
Thank you, Nick, and happy to be with everybody this afternoon. So a little bit of background on City of Appleton. We're a city of about 75,000 residents. The reference is also, where's Appleton? Well, for the last several years, for reference, the teams that come in to play the Green Bay Packers actually stay in Appleton. We're about 25 miles south and just a little bit west of Green Bay. What's unique about Appleton is I'm so lucky. I'm the largest city in 2 counties, and I have a portion of my city in 3 counties, and I've got a number of school districts. So it's and we are part of the largest municipality of a regional area that's about 250,000 in an urbanized area. So it's a little bit of background on the city of Appleton. We've been engaged in strategic planning. We started that in about 1999, and part of strategic planning really is to talk about assumptions. And when I say assumptions, is what's going on in the world today that we need to pay attention to, and that may change the way that we approach our work. And of course, our strategic planning is really centered around our mission and our long-term mission and our vision of really why do we exist and why are we here. But in terms of communication, we've been talking about communication in our strategic planning for a number of years. And the assumption was, and I always ask the question, if I needed all of the citizens in Appleton to know something, how do I make that happen? And in the past, it was relatively easy. You'd call up the local newspaper and you convince them to do a story, and you go to the local talk radio station and you convince them to do a story, and you run a crawler across the cable television, and you can get pretty wide coverage. But the world has changed. You can't do that today. The relevance of local newspapers it continues to fade. Not everybody reads the newspaper. Not everybody listens to talk radio. So it really came down to you need to engage and meet people where they are. And where they are on a variety of different platforms. And so I think it was about 5 years ago, I created the position of communication coordinator. And the person we hired he's not responsible for doing all the communications, but he's responsible for leveraging all the various platforms to really up our engagement, to be able to answer that question. This is how we would go about letting our citizens know what's happening in Appleton, or to elicit feedback. And then there's the engagement piece. He has done an awesome job in terms of the engagement. Using the various platforms, I think that one of the mistakes that cities make is they get on social media, but they look at it as a way to push information out. And the more information they can push out, then the assumption is that, well, we put the information out there and now our residents have it. But I think we've understood that, no, engagement is really a two-way street. And so that means when they ask a question, when they make a comment, that you are there and you're doing it in real time and you're actually engaging with them and answering their questions. My communication coordinator is here with me. His name is Chad Doran. And as you were looking, you had that slide up of pros and cons. We were looking at the cons, and Chad says, well, we don't look at those as cons. We look at those as opportunities. So interacting with hostile residents, for instance, that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity to engage with them and educate and get the facts out there. Everyone else is watching. You put facts out there, and they may continue to be hostile, but everyone else who's engaged and on that thread or on Facebook or whatever that platform is and they're watching, they're seeing that we're putting honest information out there. And we have to learn that really has an impact. So, okay, where do you want to go next here, Nick? Okay. Right, we first started working with Polco, and we saw Polco as an opportunity. So we talk a little bit about the way we utilize our strategic plan. It's really tied into how we do our budget. We've got large strategies that we employ, and then those strategies are used by each of our department to provide a framework for their activities. And one of the things that we continue to work on is, how do we measure what we're doing? How do we measure our progress? And it really comes down to, we can all measure outputs, check marks, numbers. We did this many things. We engaged with this many people, but that's not an outcome. And so I've worked very hard with our team and our staff to really define outcomes, and meaning, okay, where are we today and where do we want to go? And more often than not, outcomes are measured over time, and they're measured by trends. And in order to get a really good handle on an outcome, you have to ask the same question repeatedly over time, and that will give you better data in terms of, okay, how are we doing? Are we making progress? Do our citizens see that we're moving in the right direction? And so that's where I have seen, and when we have seen, the value of Polco, because it's a way to come up with those questions, ask those questions consistently over time, and then start to track that. But I think one of the other benefits is, oh man, my screen just did the same thing. Okay, one of the benefits is that it's statistically valid, and we certainly value that. Okay.
Mayor Hanna, I found if I clicked on the orange flower down at the bottom of my screen, it brought it back up. But it took me a few minutes to find it.
Here we go.
Okay.
All right. So we've been using Polco. We've been using our various platforms to inform people and put various questions out there and gotten feedback. So we've asked a number of questions. Do you want to go to that next screen there, Nick? There. Here's just an example. So we look at this, and we're starting to get more residents to sign up. So Chad and I look at this, and we go 875, and we're not happy with that. We want that to increase. But in talking to Nick, I understand, well, that's not bad. And that can be statistically relevant if you get them to respond to questions. So, we've asked a number of questions. What I'm excited about for the future, though, is to come up with more of these outcome-based questions that we can tie back into our strategies and into our budgeting, making budget decisions. And again, it's not about doing different things. It's about the context in which you do things and the changes or the tweaks that you might make in the services that you provide based on the feedback that you're getting. Are we using our resources to move the city forward in a way that's embraced by our citizens? That's really the big question, and Polco has helped us do that.
Mayor, just as a testament to you and Chad, just to point out for the audience there, as you can see, you guys' engagement helped drive a lot of responses and quality input data from the community out of the gate. Polco's folks respond, they become part of the city's digital standing panel. And so that's 875 residents that get notified as you guys put new questions out. And I think you guys have just done an awesome job in your emphasis and civic engagement there with the community.
A lot of that
distribution.
Yeah, a lot of that credit goes to Chad, is really leveraging the different platforms to drive that engagement. And we've got other anecdotes of where this has manifested itself. And I think this works in concert with our very deliberate effort to make sure that the engagement is civil. And that includes at public meetings, panels, and online on our different platforms. That we do not tolerate uncivil engagement. And I think by sending that message, that helps. We want people it's okay to disagree. We want to hear varying opinions because it helps us. It makes us stronger, not weaker. So you're always going to have, I think, that graph that you had, that myth-busting graph, that the more people that you engage, you're just going to get more of the fringe people, and we have not found that to be true. We have really found it to be very, very valuable. I'll give you one quick example of just engagement in general. We accepted RFPs for a mixed-use project that included a new library. And the staff, we went through those RFPs and we chose one. And then we had put out a public call for a public meeting. We want to show this to you, and we want to hear your questions, and we want to engage with you. Well, we had over 200 people in that room, and they didn't all agree. But that is just a sign of the kind of engagement that we've been able to foster. We had almost 80 people in a room for a preliminary report on a mobility study. Are you kidding? We had 80 people, and the feedback was so constructive. But a lot of that is our effort to really reach out and say, and invite people in all kinds of different venues. And we have found it to really be strengthening our ability to make good decisions, not the opposite. So here's one of the general questions that we asked. Do you think we're moving in the right direction? And, you know, with the amount of engagement and the number of people that have signed up, I'm pretty good with these results. But the fact that you can break it down by education level, by gender, by district in the city, is very helpful. And to have it be statistically valid. Moving forward, I can tell you this. Our police department has done community surveys. They generally do one about every other year. And it is a project. And when I've talked to our police chief about being able to use Polco and really honing in on what kinds of questions do we want to ask consistently that'll point towards the outcomes that we're looking for, he is so excited to be able to use this because of the validity of the results. It's really hard when you're doing a paper survey and mailing it out and then getting the responses and collating that. That's an expensive, lengthy process. To be able to use this tool, have all people already sign up, and you've got the statistics that you need to make it a valid survey, and it's going to make it much easier for us to engage and get that kind of feedback pointed towards the outcomes that we want to see for our city. So the budgeting process, we kind of touched on, we use what I call performance-based budgeting. So it really starts with the strategic plan, the mission and vision, and then drills down from there. Each department has a mission and vision that is in alignment with the city's mission and vision. We have overall strategies. We've got 7 key strategies pointed towards our mission and vision. Each department and actually each program within each department has to utilize at least one of those key strategies to frame their work. And then as you drill down, the programs have to define how they're using those strategies. And then we come to the measurements. And like I mentioned before, it's really defining those outcome measurements that we're happy with. And that's where we can use the Polco as a tool to help measure our progress towards those outcomes. So here you go. You're back to the budgeting vision. I think this is having that feedback loop really keeps it front and center for our departments and our employees to say, okay, how are we doing? And based on the feedback and the valid feedback that we're getting, maybe we're not making the progress or we're going backwards. We got to spend some time and take a look. Then you can use Polco to ask more specific questions. Okay, what do you think about this? How would you respond to this? And really kind of test maybe some of the ideas or the answers, or solicit ideas. You can solicit ideas using Polco, giving them a menu. So having that feedback loop is very valuable and will help us in terms of making changes and prioritizing the direction that our programs and our services go.
Mayor Hanna, I appreciate that. I mean, for anybody who's been to Appleton and just see what a great city it is, and really appreciate that. I think you guys, great vision and great leadership there, and I appreciate you taking some time to share it with us. We're nearing the end here. I want to get some of you guys great questions that you may have. Before we do so, I just wanted to give, in the excitement, I skipped over the quick fire. So I failed to give everybody around the panel, around the horn, a chance to just a high level thought of how technology is changing city governance. But while we do that, let's do this in 2 parts, go around the horn. Just a final thought on that topic of technology and governance, and any final takeaway you want to leave our audience with. Michelle, I'll start with you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nick. You know, like I said, I've been collecting public opinion data for many years, and technology has definitely influenced what we're doing and how we're doing it, and we're just trying to keep up with it and manage it. But I do think there's so many opportunities with it to now make help get more responsive representative resident opinions into decision making with the timeliness, the savings and costs, all those types of things are great. And so I think the main advice I would have for folks is that, engaging with technology for public engagement it's not only important, it's unavoidable. Whether you try to react to it or not, it's coming for you. It's coming down the road. So the more you can take charge and get ahead of it, the most important part is be strategic and be preemptive. Also, understand that it takes resources. Like Mayor Hanna, a number of years ago, had already assigned someone to start working on this stuff. I found when I worked with a lot of communities, they're just still trying to catch up, and they're still using it as a responsibility they assign to staff off time. It really is important to acknowledge that this is where we're at in the world, and you need people signed specifically to do these kind of outreaches and to engage with these technologies. And then also, my main piece of information, it's what I share all the time, is really the importance of the representative resident, making sure you get everyone into decision making. So the more that this technology you can use to increase your representation so that you can use resident opinions for priority-based policy decisions. Also, as performance measurement, it's really important to hear from everybody and get the right people at the table responding. So to be able to utilize technology to make it so everybody can respond easily and quickly and timely, it's so key to how we're going to manage and run our local governments. And I think as local governments, we need to start to get ahead of it, understand it, and start to put resources towards it so we get it right.
Perfect. Thanks, Michelle. I'll share my closing thoughts here. Just a reminder, if you want to start, for anybody in the audience who has questions or comments on this, please go ahead and type them into the GoToWebinar chat window, and then we can start filtering through them. So as we wrap up, we can take a few of those questions. My key takeaway, or what I'd like to impart to the audience today, is what I feel is our society just underwent one of the biggest shifts in communication probably since the printing press. I mean, I think prior to the printing press, it was a lot of one-to-one or one to a small group, and the printing press for the first time allowed one to, large numbers of one-to-many communication. Television and radio kind of really enhanced what that one-to-many was, but it was still kind of just like Mayor Hanna said, it was one-to-many, and it wasn't two-way, it wasn't dialogue. And what the internet and the recent technological innovation in communication has allowed is, for the first time really in history, it is facilitating mass two-way communication. And I think that technology coming into the public sphere is inevitable. And I think that we realize that residents have been demanding it. We've been trying to meet them, shoehorning traditional solutions to fit that. But I don't think that's the long run solution. I think we need to embrace the change that it's there and try to tame it and organize it and make sure it's civil and constructive as much as possible. So I just recognizing that, taking a step back and recognizing that trend, I think it's inevitable. It's important for cities. We're excited to be working in this area dedicated to this mission. And we think it's the right thing to do. So, and ultimately, I think it's to the benefit of the city, because all that communication brings data that cities can use to help ensure that we're constantly innovating and improving and increasing resident quality of life, which I think is ultimately what it's all about. So that's my key takeaway. Final words, closing. I'll pass it to you, Mayor.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nick. I'm pretty much on the same page with you, is to remember that to use these platforms as a two-way street and a one-way, and that engagement really is about that and responding. You need to respond to the people that are engaging with you as if they're standing in front of you. So it means timely, respectful, and to use the platforms to do that. And so, yeah, I think we have found that it has really enhanced our ability, and we're excited about the future to be able to keep moving forward and take advantage of the changes in technology. You go back to what I started with, and that is strategic planning. And when you're updating your strategic plan, you're always thinking about latest trends and making those assumptions. And almost always in our assumptions, we're talking about changing technology. And how can we understand it? How can we use it to our advantage? How can we use it to accomplish our goals and our mission and our vision for our city? we have to stay. Our saying is we want to stay on the cutting edge of change, because if we're not leading change, then we're chasing change, and if we're chasing change, then we're falling behind. I want people chasing us and be out there. But then my staff reminds me, yeah, we're okay with the cutting edge. We don't want to be on the bleeding edge. Okay, I get it. I get it. So can I move into this, Nick? There was a question up here about engagement is equitable and inclusive. So how do we ensure inclusivity in our engagement? We have actually used Polco to ask questions about culture, about treating other people with dignity, and how they feel about that. And one of the things we've also done here in Appleton is we've actually had a position dedicated to diversity and inclusion in the city, and we've had that position for 21 years. And so this platform is also open to that office to use. But that office's job is to engage with diverse communities in our city and to make those connections. And so we use that kind of relationship to say, hey, and encourage people, sign up for Polco. We value your feedback as well as everybody else. So we've had some questions out there that we've asked about specifically culture and treating people with dignity and respect, because that's been a push of ours for the last about year and a half.
Yep. I'll also take a crack. It was a great question. I'll just speak to, on the Polco side, the one way that we help ensure that it's inclusive and equitable is the barrier to participation, which Michelle mentioned, we keep really low. We only ask residents to provide their name and zip, and with that, we attempt to make a match to the voter file, and that's how we're able to figure out exact precinct and age and items like that. So we're not asking everybody to self-report a ton of demographics, but then when we get that match with the voter file, we are able to see and help a city in real time understand who is participating and who isn't. And that real-time feedback on who's not participating can help a city adjust and tailor their outreach to hit those parts of the community that they don't often hear from. Just examples we've seen are when cities do outreach, they'll often miss. You get a lot of 50 and 60-year-old males on Facebook, but you often miss 20-year-olds or young families, and then you can work with your local school district to get young families or sports leagues, or the older group go to a senior center, and you're constantly watching the real-time results and adjusting outreach to better balance who comes in. So it's measuring is the first step to fixing or improving inclusivity and equitability. And so we try to make those measurement points available so we can work on that topic. But that's a great question.
And I would like to add in, just because I do a lot of surveys in communities, and who we do find are non-respondents a lot are young folks, transient folks, renters, people who are not as connected to the community. And I think by offering them options to engage digitally, because they're already on their phones or on their computers, rather than have to do other types of activities that take them kind of outside their normal mode of business, we think is just really the way that survey research is moving in the future, that we want to meet people where they're at and make it simple. And so I think some of the ways technology will help us, I hope, will bring more of those folks into the decision-making processes in communities.
Yep, great point. Great question.
So can I mention one other thing, Nick?
Yeah, please do.
I wanted to just touch a little bit on education and how use of these different platforms can really help in educating your citizens. I think one of the frustrations and I talk to colleagues is, well, it's so complicated and people don't know what we do and they're making decisions based on emotions and not on facts. And so you have to make some effort to get, to communicate with them and to educate them as to not just what you do, but why you do it. What is the context? And so the feedback that you can get through these surveys can help inform how educated or how informed are they, and can inform the efforts that you need to do to ramp that up. One of our strategies has been, with the decline of the print media and the old reliability on your residents for print media to get information, we've used a strategy of, you know what, when we have an important topic, we write the article, but we write it with information, and we write it with both sides, kind of the pros and cons, as if you are the reporter. And you write it that way with the facts, and then we post it on our social media platform, and we use the other platforms to push the information out and say, here it is, and then we send it out as a press release. Each time we've done that, the press has used our story that we wrote. But you have to write it in a fair way. But it certainly has helped us be able to engage with people and to educate them and get them the facts, because too oftentimes the print media is limited by column inches and limited by the number of words they can have, and they just miss a lot of key points. So that's just one of the strategies that we've used. And again, the feedback loop can help you gauge, all right, how are we doing? Do they have the information? You can also use it and attach the reports and the articles and the things to help educate people. So those are just some of the strategies that we've used.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's funny, we've worked with a few cities who have said, we don't necessarily want more participation, although that would be great. Our goal is, these are complex issues that we're doing on behalf of the city, and we want resident input, but we really want it to be better informed. So it's why we try to design something different than a SurveyMonkey with just a question. So it helps, you can include renderings, images, costs of the project, whatever you feel is relevant to help inform the respondent on. They are complex issues. And I was reading a book called Wisdom of Crowds. If anybody hasn't read it, I highly recommend it. But it says in some complex environments, tapping the collective intelligence of a group can really help improve the outcomes. But you just have to follow a couple guidelines. You have to make sure everybody is aware of some of the fundamental pros and cons and costs and benefits of the project. And if you do, the input can be really valuable from everyone. So it's been a guiding light to us, but I think that's a great point you make there, Mayor. Appreciate it. If there's no other questions, I know we're running close to the hour. I think it's gonna, yeah, go ahead.
Nick, we do have quite a few questions, and they're very good questions. So I think the best approach would be for everybody who's still on the webinar, we will send out a recording of everything that we went over today. And because there's some really great, thoughtful questions that I think we need to answer on our end, we'll also follow up with some responses to those. We have some for Mayor Hanna, Nick, and Michelle. So we'll send that all in one complete package to you by the end of the week.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Carlin. I was only seeing the one there in the module, so I apologize. Okay, great. So Carlin, then the action was we'll get those and help follow up with everybody, but we're at the end of our window now. Is that